Can you hear me now? There we go. All right, so thank you all for being here this afternoon. As Miles noted, my name is Scott Roecker. I'm the Director for Nuclear Threat Reduction and the Sous Sherpa for the Nuclear Security Summit process. And so I'll take your questions here in just a minute, but wanted to give you just a little bit of a background on the Nuclear Security Summit. A lot of questions have been asked about why is this important, and this is something that the President set out in April of 2009 in the Prague speech to outline his desire to convene a global conference on nuclear security, which he did in Washington in 2010, and we've had four such summits since then. And the summits are vitally important in terms of preventing a terrorist from acquiring nuclear material to make an improvised nuclear device. And so we see this in three steps. Really, the first is intent. And the intent of we've seen that terrorists have demonstrated the intent to acquire an improvised nuclear device, so we know that the intent is there. Number two is the knowledge required to make an improvised nuclear device. And so, this information is out there, it's on the internet, it's in university libraries as well, so the knowledge required to construct an improvised nuclear device is out there as well. And so the most important and the last piece, or the last step of this, is the material, the highly enriched uranium, the separated plutonium. So fortunately, you can't just go to a mine and dig up highly enriched uranium. You need a vast industrial complex to be able to create and enrich this material to make it usable in an improvised nuclear device. And so it's incumbent upon states, upon nations that hold this type of material to make sure that it's secured and wherever possible eliminated. And so the Nuclear Security Summit is very focused on that supply, on the highly enriched uranium, on the plutonium, the necessary materials for an improvised nuclear device. And so that's why you're seeing the announcements from Japan on the removal of all highly enriched uranium and separated plutonium from the fast critical assembly. That's enough material for 50 nuclear weapons. So it's very significant and very important. We have 14 countries plus Taiwan that have removed all highly enriched uranium. And so there's a number of countries where you won't even find this material anymore. So that's why you see a lot of the announcements focused on the supply and on this very important material. So is this working now? Okay, thank you. So I just wanted to give that in terms of just a little bit of a background in terms of the national commitments on securing the supply. And there's certainly a lot that needs to happen in terms of the global nuclear security architecture, which is why you'll see action plans for the United Nations, the IAEA, the Interpol, Global Initiative to Combat Nuclear Terrorism, and Global Partnership. And so there's also an international component to securing these materials. And so that's, in a nutshell, what we're trying to accomplish and why the Nuclear Security Summits are so important. And so with that, I'll be happy to take any questions that you might have.
Please state your name and affiliation.
I handed it back.
Just go ahead and speak loud.
Okay. Thank you very much. So the question was about the importance of the bilateral relationship between the United States and China and the recent joint statement that was issued yesterday on nuclear security cooperation. And so we see our bilateral relationship with China as one of the most important in the world. Obviously, China has a very important role to play as it relates to securing nuclear materials. We've had robust engagement with China for more than a decade on best practices exchanges on important topics on securing nuclear material. Just 2 weeks ago, China opened a Center of Excellence, which will be a forum where these best practices can be exchanged and an opportunity for China to share that throughout the region as well and demonstrate its leadership on nuclear security to the region. We also work very closely together on the conversion of reactors that use highly enriched uranium. There are Chinese origin miniature neutron source reactors in 5 different countries around the world, working very closely to convert those reactors so they no longer require the highly enriched uranium fuel to operate. In terms of the future, there's a lot more that we can do in terms of countering nuclear smuggling. So again, this highly enriched uranium, the separated plutonium, we know that there is material that's outside of regulatory control. And so we're stepping up efforts with a number of key bilateral countries to do what we can to interdict and detect this material and get it back under regulatory control. So in sum, the relationship between the United States and China is one of the most important in the world, and we look forward to expanding on our already strong cooperation.
Yes, Jose Lopez with the Mexican News Agency. What was the criteria to choose the 4 Latin American countries that were invited, and what type of commitment are you expecting from countries such as Mexico?
So there were no criteria per se in terms of summit attendees, and so really the 2010 summit included 47 nations and 3 international organizations. It expanded to over 50 countries and 4 international organizations with the Seoul Summit in 2012. And really there was no set criteria in terms of who would be participating, but we looked for countries that had a role to play in nuclear security. And so, that could be a number of different roles, whether it be the minimization of highly enriched uranium or roles that they're playing in terms of the international organizations. In terms of commitments coming out of this summit, you'll see that we'll have 5 action plans for the UN, the IAEA, Interpol, Global Initiative, and Global Partnership. And in those action plans, there'll be specific activities that we as summit nations will pledge to do in those international organizations. So it's not so much a dictate to those international organizations. It's actions that we will take as members of those international organizations. And so I think a lot of the commitments and a lot of the action that you'll see moving forward will be in terms of what we can do under those action plans to strengthen those international organizations and institutions.
Thank you. Stephanie Cook from Nuclear Intelligence Weekly. I'm going to ask you it's a little bit of a hardball question. I just wondered if you could comment on when or why the decision or a decision was made to focus very explicitly on HEU and maybe implicitly on plutonium, but not explicitly. And I know it's a very awkward area with some countries engaging in commercial reprocessing, but the fact is there's an awful lot of plutonium out there with no place to go. And I also kind of wonder why the administration hasn't been a bit more vocal on it until quite recently.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that question. It's a very good one. Certainly the summit does focus on highly enriched uranium and plutonium, but we've definitely seen more in terms of accomplishments and announcements as it relates to highly enriched uranium. Although there have been several on plutonium as well. We saw that the first removal of separated plutonium taking place in 2012 with Sweden, excess plutonium being removed from Italy and Belgium in 2014, and then of course the separated plutonium coming out of the fast critical assembly. But you're right that there are metric tons of plutonium in the civilian sector, and the issues ultimately come down to how countries view this material. Some see it as an asset, and some see it as a liability. An asset in terms of using it as fuel, MOX fuel, or whatever type of fuel in terms of powering reactors. And so we've certainly focused on plutonium, and I think we've been able to make some strides in the summit process, but really, given the limited number of countries that have separated plutonium, this is really something that's handled better in a bilateral or in a small group, and so the summit context itself doesn't really lend itself to broad announcements writ large on plutonium, and so this is something that is a priority for the Obama administration, but it's something that's not handled as much in the Nuclear Security Summit context, rather through bilateral discussions.
Patrick Malone with the Center for Public Integrity here in Washington. Yesterday, Ben Rhodes, during his briefing, mentioned that there was going to be some specific counter-ISIL discussion today. Can you frame for us in what context that happened and which nations were involved and what some of the action that happened in that was? We'd like to know a little more about it.
Sure, and so that's in reference to the afternoon session here at the Nuclear Security Summit. The scenario-based policy discussion, as we describe it, will focus more on counter-ISIL and terrorism writ large, while it still will have a focus on nuclear, radiological, chemical, and biological materials, so weapons of mass destruction. And so this was a decision that was made several months ago in terms of bringing in the idea of terrorism. Certainly, the focus of the summit has always been on nuclear terrorism, but given events recently, again, several months ago, we made a decision to have a session focused a little bit more directly on terrorism. So that session hasn't yet taken place. It'll kick off here in about 45 minutes. And so we'll have more in terms of the outcomes from that discussion, but it will be, similar to the rest of the Nuclear Security Summit. It'll be a free-flowing conversation about terrorism and steps that we can take to help prevent nuclear terrorism.
Thank you. My name is Haik. I'm from Armenia. I would like to ask about Iran, which is our neighboring country. Do you anticipate that the sanctions against Iran may continue to loosen if Tehran remains committed to the commitments that they have previously assumed? And practically, how would you see the process, the ongoing process between between the United States and Iran? And also, if you would have any comment regarding Armenia-Iran relations, economic relations, if you follow it. Thank you.
Thanks very much. So in the United States, we obviously have a lot of people who work on a range of different issues related to nuclear security and nonproliferation. And so Iran is not an issue that I'm focused on and is not a topic of the Nuclear Security Summit here today. So I'm not going to be able to comment with regards to sanctions on Iran at this time. But thank you for your question.
Yes, Fridtjof Jacobsen from Norway. Russia decided not to attend this year's Security Summit. I wondered if you could describe how that, what kind of impact that has made on the work to heighten the nuclear security in the world, and whether there are other initiatives, bilateral or in multilateral settings, that will be taken to get Russia back in the international fold on this from the US.
Thanks for that question. So we regret Russia's decision not to participate in the preparatory meetings for the 2016 Nuclear Security Summit or the summit itself. As far as the United States is concerned, we left the door open for them to re-engage with the process, and really in September of last year, of 2015, is when they made a public announcement that they were not going to attend the summit. And so, like I said, we regret that decision. But it's, we see it as a missed opportunity for Russia. I mean, they obviously have an important role to play on this, and by not being here today, they're really isolating themselves from the discussion. In terms of moving forward, we enjoy a good, strong cooperation with Russia on nuclear security. It isn't what it looked like, 4 or 5 years ago, but we still cooperate in a number of areas. One of the most important is on the repatriation of highly enriched uranium from third countries. So you may have saw in the news late last year that Uzbekistan returned its final quantity of Russian origin highly enriched uranium, and so that's something we work very closely on. Russia is also co-chair of the Global Initiative to Combat Nuclear Terrorism, which the United States is the other co-chair, and so we enjoy great cooperation under the GICNT. So I think moving forward, there's definitely room to grow in terms of the bilateral relationship, and we're hopeful that that will happen, but there'll also be opportunities to engage in multilateral forums as well.
David Smith of The Guardian. The President talked about the perils of nuclear materials not always being very secure at various locations, and how just something the size of an apple in terms of plutonium could be very dangerous. Could you give any more details about how significant the risks actually are? Are there any particular countries where you're very worried that these materials are not secure? And just in terms of the practicalities, I mean, could a terrorist literally walk out of a building with this plutonium in a suitcase, or is it way more complicated than that?
It's a good question, a difficult one to answer in this context, but certainly, we're concerned about the security of nuclear materials no matter where they are located on the planet. And so it's not useful to get into discussions about material in a particular country or not. It's the fact that this material is there presents this risk. And like I mentioned earlier, there's material that we know that's outside of regulatory control too. And so, the President and the leaders who have joined us here today are very focused on measures that they can take to secure this material. we talked at the front a little bit about intent and knowledge, and so you're asking a little bit about the knowledge piece of it. How easy would it be to use this material and turn it into an improvised nuclear device? And it's there's certainly some technical knowledge required, but it's not as difficult as one might assume. And so it is, generally speaking, this material is very well secured. So putting it in a suitcase and walking out of a facility shouldn't happen anywhere on the planet. That is why we're focused on insider threat. There's a gift basket that the United States sponsored on this topic. All known any material that's left a facility that we know about has involved an insider, someone who works inside the facility, who knows the security, knows where the material is located, and is able to slowly divert that out without getting noticed. And so this insider threat is one of the more important and difficult threats to deal with. And so that is a renewed focus, something we focused on here in terms of a gift basket at the 2016 Nuclear Security Summit, and something we want to focus on moving forward. So it is very difficult to be able to get this material outside of a facility, because once it's outside the facility, it's very difficult to get back under regulatory control.
Next question.
Dmitry Zlodev, RIA Novosti, Russian news wire service. The United States want to stop its project of MOX fuel fabrication plant, and the United States want to mix weapon plutonium with other materials to bury it in special stockpiles. Do you think that this step, voluntary or involuntary, can violate U.S.-Russian agreement on utilization of plutonium? Thank you.
Thanks for that question. Yeah, the United States recently announced a change in our plutonium disposition policy from MOX fuel to one of dilute and dispose. And so as it relates to the plutonium management and disposition agreement with Russia, we believe that there are very clear clauses in that agreement that allow for a change in disposition technology. In fact, Russia changed its disposition technology in 2010, and there was an update to the PMDA accordingly to take that into account. And so we think that there's precedence for that, and we believe that the dilute and dispose plutonium disposition technology is consistent with the PMDA, and of course we need to work with our Russian colleagues to negotiate that and to come to agreement on that fact.
My name is Nian Shengzhang from People's Daily China. A lot of concern right now about the future of the summit. So one suggestion from a Chinese delegation that to build some kind of a new nuclear security culture. Culturally, be also international cooperation. So what's your idea about that? Do you think it's feasible or constructive for the future? Thank you.
Yeah, I think all ideas that are out there in terms of how to maintain the momentum on nuclear security after this nuclear security summit, which is the last in this format. So certainly it doesn't stop another country from deciding to host a summit on nuclear security. But absent that, I think that there's a lot of good ideas out there. You'll see a gift basket that will be released later today that will establish a nuclear security contact group, which will be similar to the Sherpa network that's been established in the summit process. And this group will meet once or twice a year to review the status of commitments and take account of everything that's taking place as it relates to nuclear security. And so we hope that group will help maintain the momentum on nuclear security. We see the IAEA playing a very important role. They'll be hosting a ministerial conference in December of this year, and so that's, while not at the leader level, still minister level, and the United States will be represented by Secretary Moniz from the Department of Energy. And so that's an opportunity for all countries that are part of the IAEA to get together at a senior level, at a minister level, and talk about nuclear security. And so as you see here, there's a lot of announcements and deliverables that are being presented. We're hopeful that this IAEA ministerial conference, that will be another opportunity to have deliverables and announcements on nuclear security. So we see that playing an important role as well. The action plans are designed to, outline ways that these organizations can be stronger. And I think that might tie directly into the comment you made about nuclear security culture and developing this culture within these organizations, the importance of nuclear security and the importance of maintaining vigilance, because nuclear security, we never get success. It's never complete. We always have to make sure that we're doing everything we can to secure this material as long as it's in our possession. So it's fundamentally important to make sure that we maintain the momentum that's been created by the summit process.
Thank you. Earlier today, it was announced that Japan will be sending the materials from the fast reactor at Kyoto. And so what will the process be once it gets here to the U.S.? Because I know that the last commitment Japan made brought the materials to Savannah Riverside, and we've got the quandary of disposal right now with the waste isolation pilot plant, trying to get back on its feet after what happened in February of 2014. What will the disposal path ultimately be, and what will it be in the interim?
So that's a good question, and so this is relating to the recent announcement, the KUKA, the removal of the plutonium and highly enriched uranium from KUKA, and so it'll follow a similar pathway to the fast critical assembly material of plutonium and highly enriched uranium from there. So what will happen is the material will come to the United States. It'll be put into secure storage. The highly enriched uranium, again, will be downblended into low-enriched uranium, and the same disposition pathway that's been identified and has been approved from an environmental standpoint will be utilized to dilute and dispose of the plutonium. And so we've got all the Department of Energy has, the environmental approvals that it needs to bring that material into the United States and to go through the process of diluting and disposing of this material. And so the KUKA material will follow the same path as the fast critical assembly material.
Hi. Yeah, just since we're on that subject, I hope it's not too outside the general discussion area, but I just wonder, because I read a lot of the reports about our plutonium management disposition and all the different options that we're considering. But having seen, actually walked through Pantex a long time ago and seen where the plutonium pits are stored, and I'm sure you're aware of what I'm talking about, and the problems at WIP and the problems at Savannah River. Is there any thought being given to just, while we decide what to do ultimately, making some kind of interim storage facility like the British have, with a really thick concrete walls, someplace to put it that's a little safer than some of the places we use now? I just wonder if there's any just common sense. Ed Lyman brought this up the other day. Why don't we just build a big building and, with hugely thick concrete walls and other things to make it secure?
Sounds like you're describing HUMF at Y12, the new facility that stores all that highly enriched uranium. Again, these giant walls and security by design. So unfortunately, I can't comment in terms of any plans that might be in place with a potential plutonium storage facility. I would defer that comment to the United States Department of Energy.
Any additional questions?
To have someone that answers questions, thank you. This one specifically relates to, it also is tangential to the Department of Energy because it involves their budget. But I'm asking this question from a more practical standpoint than a specific technical budget standpoint, and that is the reduction in international nuclear security spending in the President's proposed budget for fiscal year 2017. What are the practical effects of that, and are there some maybe factors that we don't see that that could be leading that decision? I mean, what's going on there, and how's it going to affect our efforts globally to secure nuclear materials?
That's an excellent question, and unfortunately, you prefaced it by saying I'm good at answering questions because, as it relates to the budget, I'm not in a position to comment on that. That's really part of our OMB process in terms of developing the budget and doing weighing the costs and the benefits to weapons modernization versus the non-proliferation piece. So fortunately, all I could say really is that, obviously nuclear security and non-proliferation is a very important part of the president's legacy, something he takes very important. A lot of the important work that's left out there doesn't necessarily require a lot of money. It's more political will. So I don't necessarily see the budget as holding back any potential future work and future commitments on nuclear security. But in terms of the trade-off and what that looks like, I can't get into those details here today.
Hi. Australia has done a bit of work in recent years in terms of reducing the holdings and use of highly enriched uranium. I just wanted to ask, what would the White House's hopes be going into the future, and what more would need to be done?
So that's true. Australia has done quite a bit in terms of reducing inventories of highly enriched uranium, and I think every time the Nuclear Threat Initiative has put out a ranking of security of nuclear materials, Australia's at the very top, so congratulations on that. In terms of going forward, I know that there's still a small amount of highly enriched uranium in Australia, something that we could consider working together on in terms of bringing that total down to zero. We look to try to eliminate material from facilities. One, because then it's no longer a target, and two, there's a tremendous amount of security costs that are associated with housing that material. So even if you've got a couple kgs of material, the amount of security that's required to make sure that that's not stolen is pretty high. So we see financial benefits to consolidating material into fewer locations, and whenever possible, eliminating that material.
Another question?
Good afternoon. My name is Giuseppe Sarcina. I'm an Italian journalist of Corriere della Sera. I would like to ask a question on North Korea, and in terms of nuclear threat reduction. Today, we know that North Korea made another nuclear test. So my question is about how this summit is making a difference between 2 days ago and today. And if the answer is yes, which is this difference? Thank you.
Thanks very much. So the focus of the Nuclear Security Summit is really on preventing terrorists or non-state actors, criminals, from acquiring nuclear material. So it's not focused on state programs for nuclear weapons programs, as is the case with North Korea. There are a number of other forums, such as the United Nations, where that conversation is taking place. So there's nothing in the summit process that relates to North Korea that's being handled in other forums.
If I can follow up this answer, because yesterday President Obama clearly said that North Korea was an agenda of this, at least in the bilateral meeting with China. So probably it's not in the agenda of the Nuclear Security Summit, but for sure the President Obama said yesterday that it was an agenda on the bilateral. So my question is about bilateral.
That's right. We had a bilateral meeting with China yesterday where we talked about a range of issues. We also had a trilateral meeting with Japan and ROK, Republic of Korea, on DPRK, and so that's certainly been handled in sessions outside the Nuclear Security Summit. And so I'm here today to talk to you about the Nuclear Security Summit process.
Just to add to that, as you noted, the president did talk about North Korea. And those meetings are on the margins of the summit. One of the benefits of this summit, though, is it gets more than 50 world leaders together where they can talk through a range of issues. And North Korea was definitely one discussed in the trilateral meeting and as well as the bilateral meeting. And the United States and China have been strong partners in establishing the UN sanctions to stop North Korea from having a nuclear weapon, and the United States policy is that we're committed to a denuclearized Korean peninsula. Any final questions? Okay, let me just give you all the spelling of his name, just so you have it. First name, Scott, S-C-O-T-T. Last name, Roecker, R-O-E-C-K-E-R. R-O-E-C-K-E-R. And his title, Director for Nuclear Threat Reduction at the White House National Security Council. We ask that you continue to follow all the gift baskets that are being presented at the Nuclear Security Summit on nss2016.org. And also, if you go to whitehouse.gov, you'll see a number of fact sheets and statements that are being released throughout the day.
Thank you.